Let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Again, this was a series of webinars that we are going to be trying to do 2 or 3 times a week with the Spyder product, and eventually we'll be doing some more with the Terra product as well. Just want to let everybody know that this is kind of a listen in only. Unfortunately, you cannot speak in this one, but you do have the ability to ask questions. I'm joined by Joel Turensky and Jason Wines. They're going to be assisting me in answering some of these online questions. There's Joel. And so feel free to submit questions. This is, there's Jason. Hey, Jason. So today's subject is basically we're going to go through the interface to set up and configure both the X20 and the X80. This is the initial setup configuration. We call it the new configuration manager. There are 2 pieces of software depending on which product you're using. So with the X20, we use Christie Advanced, and that's been around since 2007-ish, 2006, maybe even earlier than that. And for X80, it's Spyder Studio. So we're going to go through both because we understand that there are still plenty of X20s out there in service, and still a pretty good want and need for that information. So with that being said, let me close a couple things here. Let me share my screen. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a couple of configs, and I'm just going to go ahead and open up the Christie Advanced software. And this is the current, I have a configuration already loaded. But whenever you open up the software, it will immediately, if it sees a Spyder on the network, it will prompt you if you've connected to it in the past, if you want to connect to it. One of the most important things about the software is that it has to match the version that's loaded on the hardware. So if not, it will prompt you to either update, well, not either update or go offline. So it's real important to understand on the front panel of either Spyder, it should tell you exactly what version is loaded on that particular unit. And then you have to make sure that you open up the corresponding version of either Advanced or Studio. So we're in virtual mode here. So that's the other beauty of this software for both Studio and Advanced. You can build completely virtual configurations, or completely, you can build any kind of configuration offline. You can back it up, save it, send it to somebody. They can then download it and then restore it directly to a Spyder, and it will load directly into it. So that's one of the great features of both of these software interfaces. So I've opened this. We're going to go ahead and build some couple of configs. We're going to keep it relatively basic. I've got some other videos online that you can look at for parallel configurations and things like that. Those are a little more advanced topics. But if you're interested, I'll make sure that those links are available for you to see as well. So what we're going to do, first thing we're going to do is we're going to build just a basic sample configuration, just a single pixel space. And I'm going to do a blend, and then we'll do another one with a blend and a bunch of other pixel spaces as well. This is a pretty common configuration, a 600 pixel overlap, a blended screen, so 2 projectors converged and blended together. You'll see that to create this configuration in Advanced, which has been out there for well over a decade, is a slightly slightly different than the Studio version. So we'll go ahead and build this 2x1 array here, and I'll just toggle back to Advanced here. And I'm going to start by just going right up here to the File menu and go File, New. And it brings up this dialog box that basically walks me through a step. I hesitate from calling it a wizard, but it does gently guide you through the process of configuring your Spyder's outputs, determining whether or not you're going to add a router, an upstream matrix router, and what items that are currently in that configuration you'd like to either delete or carry over. Okay, so there's a few options here. Start with new and empty configuration. Generally, you're going to be using that top one 99% of the time. Since this webinar is kind of geared towards everyone, but is probably, probably dominated by the live event industry. So people in the live event industry who's running Spyder, they're going to be doing this on a weekly basis, right? Or even maybe even a daily basis, depending on what you're doing. In the fixed install world with dealers and integrators, they may be doing this initially just for a customer, and it's actually a pretty good presentation tool to kind of visualize what their configuration would look like and what kind of transitions they can do and everything like that. So the software is very good for that as well. So we're going to start with a new and empty configuration right here, and it walks us into this next step. This is where we determine which frames we're going to use on this system. You'll notice right over here on the left, excuse me, frame ID. So if it's a single frame, it always has an ID number, and there's several things in Spyder that are zero based. Frame ID 0 is always considered the master frame. Any additional subsequent frame in the same configuration would be considered a slave frame, and they would get ID numbers as ID 1, 2, 3, and so on. And within Advanced, you can configure an 8-box system in a single configuration. Now you can go beyond that, but you have to. It's kind of a custom situation, and we would ask that you contact either sales or support to assist you with that. Under where it says frame IP address, we would simply drop down the box, and if we had Spyders on the network that we could see, we would see a list of those IP addresses. If we're offline and we don't have a Spyder, we only get the option to add a virtual frame. Okay, so I'll go ahead and add a virtual frame, and then notice directly to the right, it tells I have a drop-down list for what type of model. Now, if we go down to the bottom here, you'll see X20 1608 versus 0808. Now, if you saw the original, the first webinar, you would get the idea of the difference between a 1608 and an 0808 is the number of inputs, okay? But if I scroll up, you'll see the old 2 and 300 series versions, because this Christie Advanced is compatible with both the X20 and the 2 and 300 series. So let's do this. We'll go ahead and choose a 1608, and down below here is where we choose the internal refresh rate. Sorry, I got these pop-ups here that I'll try to minimize as soon as they pop up. We have the internal refresh rate. This is the VI. Remember the canvas that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a 20 megapixel canvas. We want to set the refresh rate of that canvas to a constant rate. So the whole canvas is running at the same refresh rate. If I drop down the list, excuse me, you can see all the different refresh rates you can choose and how many pixels are associated with them. So we'll go ahead and leave it at NTSC, which would be 5994. I should be looking up here instead of my picture right here. This is why I understand people don't like cameras, presenters don't like to see themselves. So I'll choose NTSC, and then right below that is the stereoscopic mode if you're working with 3D, right? We're not going to touch on that in this webinar, but just know that that's where it is. So once I've set what frame I'm using and what refresh rate I'm using, I can just simply click Next. So from here, you're going to see there's 2 tabs right here, Templates and Individual Screens, okay? Basically, there's 2 types of screens within Advanced. There is just a single discrete screen, which has the improper use in spelling, but that is a single display. That is a single projector. That is a single flat panel. That is a single LED processor, right, out to a single, that only requires a single output from Spyder. A wide screen is any display that is 2 or more outputs from the Spyder. So a blend, a flat panel array, a multi-processor LED wall, anything that requires multiple outputs from the Spyder. All of these templates are just combinations of those 2 types of screens, okay? Over here where it says default format, for every type of screen I put out there or I create, it's going to drop it out there at this particular resolution. Now you can see it's defaulting to SXGA, so 1280 by 1024. Obviously, that shows you the longevity of this software. That was the kind of go-to resolution way back in the day, but you can drop it down and actually choose any number of resolutions here as your default. It may start off with the NTSC, and then if you keep going, they go into the PAL region and some other ones. I'm going to leave that there for now because we can always configure the output resolution in the next step. So we're going to build this pixel space, which is a 2 wide, 1 high array, okay? So I'm going to choose a single widescreen right here, and it puts up a pixel space. Now notice to the right, we have the properties for that particular pixel space. and it comes up with a name. Okay, now if I didn't want this one, maybe I wanted to delete it, I can just scroll up and there's a hidden button up there to say remove this pixel space. But if I scroll back down, you always want to name your pixel spaces, okay? Especially if you have multiples. And we're going to, on our next one, we will have multiple pixel spaces. So there are plenty of reasons to have a very discrete name, be descriptive so you understand which ones they are. But widescreen is actually, we'll call it main screen since that's what I called it on the screen. There we go. Now, output count and overlap. So I'm referring to blending, but this is determining how many rows and how many columns per se. So if I say I want 3 horizontal outputs, that's basically generating a 3x1 array. If I did 4, 5, and as I adjust the number of horizontal outputs, it adjusts the pixel space dimensions appropriately. I bring it back down. So I want a 2x1. So if I do 2 wide, 1 high, there it is. If I adjust the vertical size, notice it starts to get very different, right? So I'll just put it back down to 2. Down below here, you'll see overlap, okay? Notice it doesn't say horizontal overlap, it doesn't say horizontal blend and vertical blend. When it comes to blending, Spyder can blend left and right edges. Yes, left and right edges, not top and bottom. So whatever you refer to, is that horizontal blending or vertical blending, whatever you want to talk about, I always refer to it as left and right because we offer rotation, so you can rotate that output. Even when it's rotated, you can still blend it just on the left and right edges. Okay, so you have to really be careful about that. Now, I indicated that we were going to do a 600 pixel overlap. So what I would do is say I want a 600 pixel overlap. Now I can't put a percentage or inches or centimeters or what. I have to put it in pixels. So there's a bunch of calculators out there that you can do it. It's relatively simple math. That you can go out and download for the iPhone or for Android, whatever. There's plenty out there. You can go to our Facebook community and they'll give you just a list of stuff that you can use. But notice that we do not blend vertically. That's why it says overlap. So you still need to map all of these arrays properly so you have the proper data doubling in the canvas, okay? Now, so far I've done a 2x1 array, and but it's still set to SXGA. So this is where I can come down to the output resolution. And there's a factory list that I can hit the drop-down list from, and you'll see, whoops, you can see a big long list here. And if I wanted that to be 1080p, I'll just come down here to 1080p at 59. And then when I click on that, boom, it adjusts my pixel space to the proper dimension, meaning 1920 wide times 2 minus the overlap, and that's what the end result is. So it's a slightly different process to create a multi-output array in Advanced than it is in Studio. You'll see in Studio it's dramatically different, this part of it. Right below that, I'm sorry, right to the right of that, you'll see a Visa option. Now this gives you a couple of other options here. You can type in custom resolutions. There are parameters for that that we discussed in the initial webinar. But you can type in horizontal, vertical, refresh rate. Many of our factory formats utilize reduced blanking. So notice there's a tag down here that says 1920 by 1080 at 59.94 with full blanking is actually dual link bandwidth. So that's very, very true. So we use some degree of reduced blanking so that bring that down under into a single link route, okay? So I'm just gonna pop back to factory here. Connection type. What output connector am I using for the Spyder X20? You'll see that you have HD15 for analog, DVI, SDI, composite, and S-video. Now, this software is not hardware aware, so if you're using an old 200 or 300 series system that actually has composite and S-video, you would use that. So in this case, let's just assume we're going to choose SDI. Are they rotated? We can talk about that, but you can rotate outputs only. I say that, I'll repeat that, outputs only. You can only rotate outputs. Did I say outputs only? Just saying. In 90-degree increments, okay? So we can't do 45s or anything like that. It's just 90-degree increments. This is a very common mistake for newbies to go out there and think that you can rotate an input, right, or a layer. Can't do that, okay? You can only rotate outputs. One minor thing to remember, when you do rotate an output, you do add a frame. of delay. So we have to redraw those lines when we do the rotations. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to leave the rotation off for now. And then positioning, and this stuff we'll talk about on the next configuration. So I've got my pixel space, got a single pixel space. We're going to do a real simple one here. Once I'm done, I come down here to the next button and click it, and I get a green check. Okay, and in the words of an old compadre, green means go. Okay, Drew, that was few. So when you get a green check, that's basically saying I have not exceeded the number of outputs. I have not exceeded 20 megapixels, right? I haven't exceeded my vertical height limit for the canvas. That means good, I'm all good. If you had gotten something else, if I were to go back and I start, say I change this array to something like a 5x2, which would require 10 outputs, right? And I try to go back and go next, I get a big error saying at least 10 outputs are required, but only 8 physical outputs are available. So there is a degree of some fail-safe to catch these, but you want to be cautious about that, all right? So I'll just pop these back down to the right numbers. Go next. Now, in the live venue, there's always a preview, right? So we have to create a preview pixel space. So right here is where we would determine what resolution we're going to view that preview at. So you're kind of dictating what resolution the monitor is going to be, right? So it can correctly scale your program pixel spaces for the preview monitor. So in this case, there's a rule to learn that you can't make your preview pixel space larger than your program pixel space. So, or at least the tallest vertical resolution. So if my tallest vertical resolution in this configuration is 1080, that means I can use a preview of 1920 by 1080 or less. You know, in this world of UHD and everything else, that's kind of an interesting comment. But say you were doing 720, right? Your tallest combination of pixel spaces was only 720. Then you could use a preview resolution of 720 or less. If you try to go any higher, you're going to end up cutting off information off the bottom of the preview pixel space, and that's no good for anyone. So I'm just going to scroll down here and choose a 1080p resolution, and boom, when I do that, it creates a physical space called the preview preview pixel space for the main screen. You'll see a slight gap over here because of the dimensions of that pixel space. It's not going to fill the screen completely. It'll be justified to the left. I'll go ahead and click next. Here's where it says, okay, notice in my existing configuration, I have sources, I have a couple of command keys over here. I might have stills and some treatments. All of these items, I have the ability to either keep and carry over, or if I check them, they will be eliminated and deleted from the configuration when I apply it. So you can pick and choose what items you want to keep, what items you want to delete. Same with routers, upstream routers. If I wanted to add a router, I could just simply click add, and I can put in here, say, DVI router, and we'll drop down the list, and here's a big list of the protocols we support, right, or manufacturers. I'll just choose a lightware there because they're pretty top notch. Choose the connector type DVI, and then how many ins and outs, okay? And that'll carry that into my configuration. If I don't want any routers, boom, I just hit remove, and I can click next. So at this point, it has two options listed there. If I had specified a very specific Spyder on the network at the beginning of this process, I could say, go ahead and apply to the Spyder hardware now. And it would go ahead and push that configuration on the Spyder. It would reboot itself and boot back up, and we'd be connected. Since we are in virtual world here, I'm going to go ahead and just apply this to the PC now in virtual mode, okay? Takes a few seconds, get a confirmation here, you say okay, and lo and behold, there's my pixel space, right? I've got a program up top, I got a preview down at the bottom, and I can basically, at that point, I can start taking sources and dragging them onto the screen, take them into preview, do whatever I want, okay? So that's how you would build a single pixel space config. Those are probably more common in the fixed install world than they are in the live event world. The live event world, you're managing multiple pixel spaces with different pieces of content at different resolutions. So that would be a little more realistic. So let's do this. I'm gonna go ahead and clear that. Now, I'll do a quick backup because I wanna save, maybe I wanna restore this configuration later on. I can go back up, and I'll just do this to my desktop here real quick, and I'll call this X20 single pixel space. And notice it has a file extension called a .vap, Vista Advanced project, okay? So I'll go ahead and hit save, and it's always gonna prompt you, excuse me, do you wanna include still images, okay? Support's probably listening in on this webinar as well. If you call in for an issue and they ask, very commonly, they will ask, hey, can you send me your config? They'll ask you, say, don't include stills, because that will dramatically increase the size of this backup. So you have the option to save with stills or without. If this is a backup and you're on show site and you just want to make sure everything's current, I would say otherwise, yes, always include stills, because that will be the most comprehensive and complete backup, right? So I'll go ahead and say yes. Should only take a couple seconds here. Meanwhile, while that's backing up, let's look at our next scenario. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do a multiple pixel space configuration. So here we're gonna have the same type of main screen, but we're gonna add a house left, a house right, and 2 downstage monitors, okay? I'm gonna keep everything pretty much in the 1080p realm here, okay? So how do we do that? I'm gonna go here. Now I know I've already backed up. If anybody's ever been to my training, when you go file new, that should prompt you to stop and think. This is one of those things that if I don't have a backup of this configuration, I start building a new one and then I apply it, it's going to get overwritten. So you want to be cautious about that. So always stop and think when you hit file new, or if you're going to restore a configuration, because it's going to overwrite whatever is currently on your config right there. So let's go new. And I'll go down here again and say start with new and empty configuration. I'm going to stick with the same single X20, same refresh rate. Go next. And I'm going to go to individual screens. Now we have some templates here that might help do that, but I find it's a better for learning if you use the individual screens, because then you can just basically add each one, completely configure it, add the next one, completely configure it, and then go on about through the process. So we'll start by adding, our house left right here, okay? So we'll go add a discrete screen. Now it came out again at SXGA, so I just come over here to the top. I'll just start from the top, and I'm gonna call this house left, okay? It's a 1x1, okay? So I can just leave it at that. If I wanted to make it a blend or an array, I could change the number of outputs and it would adjust the pixel space accordingly, but this is a 1x1. Under the factory resolution, I'll go ahead and pick 1080p. Okay, and there you can see it corrects the aspect ratio. This is not rotated, so we're gonna leave it at that. And a common mistake people will make initially starting to build configurations is they'll hit next after they build their first pixel space. You gotta add all your pixel spaces before you click next, okay? That's a very common mistake. So now we wanna add a widescreen. Puts it in there right next to it. Now, there is a gap between pixel spaces. So every time you add a new pixel space, it puts an 8 pixel gap in the X20, okay? In the 2 and 300 series, it was 4 pixels. X80, for a good period of time, it was like 64, but they've just now with 5.4 reduced it down to 16 pixels. So it's basically 4, 8, or 16, depending on which product. So I'll come up here and you can you can see that little gap there, but it'll represent itself down here on the horizontal start, okay? But I want this to be my main screen. Again, this is gonna be a 2 horizontal, 1 vertical, 600 pixel overlap. The resolution will be 1080p. So if you think about this, I'm saying I wanna make an array that's so many horizontal wide, so many vertical wide, how many, and this with this overlap or lack of overlap, generate me a pixel space, okay? So you really have to make sure that you understand the dimensions of the pixel space you're trying to build in advanced, okay? You kind of come at it from a different perspective. You're saying, what's the array, what's the overlap, what's the orientation, and then say generate, right? Or basically when you do that, it creates the pixel space. You'll see how that differs a little bit in the studio version. Anyway, moving on, that's good for there, that's DVI. You can actually see right down here in the horizontal start, it starts 8 pixels over from the house left, so its horizontal start is at pixel 1928, okay? I'll come back over here. We'll add our house right. So I'll come over, add that. House right. Again, this is going to be 1080p, DVI, and there you can actually see its pixel space start position in the horizontal pixels. So it's going to be, this will be pixel 0 over here, 1920, and then 1928 plus whatever this pixel space dimensions, I think it's 3400 plus another 8, that all equals up to 5176. Now I want to add the two DSMs below those house left and house right. So I add another discrete space, call this DSM1. It's 1 by 1, again, it's going to be HD. But now I come down here to this positioning tab, the horizontal and vertical start. So horizontally, I want house DSM1 to be justified directly below the house left. So that would start at pixel 0. And now you can see it's overlapped. Vertically, I want it to start 1080 pixels below that. So now it drops down below. So now keep in mind, we have to take into consideration our VI height, okay? This is something that sometimes can be overlooked, right? And then you don't figure it out until you end up hitting apply configuration and it says, you can't do that. So just be cautious and remember the dimensions. Remember, if your VI height right here is now 2160, if I were to do a calculator check here, if my VI height at 2160, oops, I get 20 million divided by 2160, that's how many horizontal pixels I get. So the combination of all my pixel spaces together cannot exceed 9259, okay? All right, so I'll clear that. We'll add our last pixel space, which is gonna be house right. And I see lots of questions. I see lots of answers going out there. Before we move to the studio, maybe we'll do a quick Q&A on anything here before we move on to the studio version. This will be HD. And notice the start position, I want that. Now, I want that to be directly below house right. So what I can do is actually I can click on house right. Okay, that starts at 5176. So I can actually just apply that same number right here. 5176, and then vertically we'll start at 1080. And now we have them oriented the way I would want to see them. Now you can put them however, whatever makes sense to you. If you want to make a one big long strip, you could do that. Just know that your operator monitor is going to have two really skinny program and previews, so just be cautious. I'll go ahead. So now that I've got those all in, I'll just go ahead and click next. Got a nice big green check right there. Okay. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add my preview. Now, my vertical height is 2160, so I could use just about any resolution for my preview pixel space. I will just be consistent and use 1080p. And now you can see it creates a preview resolution, a preview pixel space for every program. Okay. I'll click next. I'm going to carry all this stuff over, and I'm not going to worry about routers for right now. I'll click next, and then I'll hit apply to local. Now, notice how my pixel space up here is kind of shifted and it's in the same, it's kind of oriented in the same way the previous one was. That's easily corrected with these little alignment tools down here. All I have to do is click on the all button and it'll recenter. Now, if you look, that looks a lot like my other one, right? Now, the difference between this configuration and the other one is that the first one was only a single pixel space and it was just called main screen. Now we have one that's called all program and all preview. This is something that is considered, this is literally laying over the top of all of our pixel spaces. Now I'm not going to get too far into this, but there's a view stack in the simulator right here that allows you to look at different views, right? So if I choose this middle one here, now I go in and I've gone underneath that all program. Now I can see my individual pixel spaces. So if I were to drop a source here, notice when I dropped it on there, now I can move it anywhere in there, but if I move it out, it goes outside the pixel space. So I'll bring more attention to that later on. But basically, anytime you have two or more pixel spaces, you're gonna have what they call an all program, right? And that's meant to be able to take a source and drop it on here, and now it can freely move anywhere in the canvas, okay? We've had this feature since the inception of Spyder, right? back in the 2 and 300 series days. So any layer can be applied anywhere on the canvas and can fly and morph and adjust aspect ratio and all that stuff. If it's applied directly into the alt program, it can move from any pixel space it wants to. But if it's loaded directly into a pixel space, it can only be seen in that pixel space. Okay. So how do we get around this? Okay. There's a little trick here. Every pixel space you create gets painted black in the simulator. Okay, so it looks like it's just solid, right? I can right click in here, go to current background, and you can see all the still images I have put in here, and say no background. Okay, I'll do the same thing for the preview. Now, if you see, I'm still in the all pixel space view, okay, and you can actually tell because the names over here, if I were to zoom in a little bit, you see the names, they're overlapped, okay? This is now like a sheet of glass sitting over the top of my other pixel spaces. So I can still drop a source right here, and now I can move it around anywhere in here, and I got alignment tools to make it fill the height, fill the width, all this kind of stuff. And these we'll go over these in future webinars, but this is really meant to be for the new configuration. I'm just going a little off topic. So anyway, I can then from here right click and say move to a pixel space. So move to house left. Well, notice as long as one bit of that layer is touching house left, it will show it here, but it's only going to be viewable in that area right over here. So just be cautious with that. And again, in future webinars, we'll discuss that. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do a backup of this as well. And oopsie, sorry. I actually did just say whoopsie, sorry. Let me just change these. So I'm gonna go File, Backup. I'm gonna call this X20 multiple pixel spaces. So here's what I'll do. I'll stop for a second. I can see the list of questions. I can see Joel feverishly answering most of them. Do we want to, Joel? Do you want to unmute? Are there any questions here I should take a peek at, or?
Yeah, we got a question here. Is how do you move the view in the simulator?
Okay, so I'm using this big funky trackball, right? So you can, if you, sorry, I just drew a blank here. So if you use the roller ball, you can zoom in and out in the simulator, right? If you just roll up, forward, and back. If you have that wheel, you can push down and then you can pan. So if you're trying to get a layer like physically positioned in there, you can kind of zoom in and then move it in closer, right? Be cautious when you're doing this, because I've done this in the past or early on. I'd be like this going, yeah, okay, and then I'd go over to the property panel to do something, and I was still had my finger on the button, and they're like, oh no, where's my where are all my pixel spaces? Fear not, you come right back over here to that button I showed you right when we started, and you can bring everything back. Okay. Anything else before I kind of shift over to the studio side of things?
No, I think we're good.
I've
got most of the questions answered. Yep.
Yeah, looks like it. There's a lot of questions in there. That's cool. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna minimize this. Now, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna open up Studio, and if you notice, if anybody who's not all that familiar with Spyder, you're going to see very quickly that Spyder Studio, and while it is a completely different piece of software and a different user interface, the panels are laid out identical, right? Sources are over here on the left, the simulator's in the middle, all the same zooming functions are there, command keys, properties, patch, script window, all of them are in the same position. So if you've learned in Studio, and then you get thrust upon into an X20 configuration, it's not going to be completely foreign. It'll be very familiar and very similar. One of the things that is dramatically different in Studio is the new configuration manager, and I personally like it. It took me about a day to get used to it, and then and then from that point forward, going back to Advanced was a little rough. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build the same type of configurations, but just on a larger scale, meaning using larger resolutions. It's not so much to see if we can max out the resolution, it's just more or less knowing the mechanics of walking through the process here, okay? So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna build a single pixel space config, and then we'll go through and we'll build a multi-pixel space config and show you how you can utilize the new configuration manager for that. So we'll start with this one, 2 projector blend. Again, just doing blending. Well, I think we'll have a separate one, an LED conversation later on down the road, and maybe bring in some panelists outside of Christie, some partners that may be able to contribute to that and have some real good viewpoints about that. So, but here I'm going to stick with blending for now. So we're going to do a 2x1, maybe with that is not a 768 overlap. That is, I have to do my math again. 6480 is not 768. Let me bear with me 1 second. I apologize. 6480 minus 3840 minus 3840. It's a 1200 overlap. My apologies. 600 times 2. There you go. Okay, so here's what we do. We go File, New. Okay, same thing. Same stop and think function. You want to make sure that what you're about to do isn't going to delete or overwrite anything. So just be cautious. Now, instead of bringing a new pop-up window, what it does is it adds a tab into the simulator menu, okay? But you're going to see up along the top here, basically a flow of what you're going to do as you go through this. And many of these steps are identical in advance, but just slightly formatted differently. So as you can say, start with new and empty configuration, or you can load the previous one that you've done here and it would just step you through it. But we'll start with new and empty. Now you can see we're in frame setup. Right up at the top here, it says, all right, what kind of frame? This only works with X80. So you're going to come over here. You have options to choose how many inputs, again, in increments of 4, okay? And how many outputs, again, in increments of 4. Down here, you'll see frame rate. What frame rate do I want to run this system at? Okay, pick the appropriate one. Pick the bit depth. Right now, keep in mind, if you watch the first webinar, you understand the difference between 8 and 12-bit determines how much canvas size I get. Okay, 8-bit is 80 million, 12-bit is 53 million. VI heights are adjusted accordingly as well. 8-bit you get 6480 vertical. 12-bit you get 4320 vertical. So just be cautious with that. So we'll leave it at we'll just put it at 8-bit for fun. Stereo mode, we're not going to worry about right now, even though it is now supported. Now, the nice thing about Studio and X80 is that you don't have to pick a resolution for preview. You just turn it on or off, okay? Because preview is written completely different in X80 than it is in X20. So I'm just going to simply turn it on and say preview enabled, right? So that way I'll be able to go in and set up any multi-viewer to show me my preview pixel space. We'll go ahead and click next. And basically what you see here, I'll make this a little bit bigger. You're going to see, it may be hard to see, but there's a little array here of dots, okay? And that's showing me my canvas, my entire 80 megapixel canvas. There's a button over here called Edit Canvas. Sorry, I just jumped right over that. Remember how I told you could change the dimensions of the canvas, meaning how tall or how wide it is, not to exceed whatever the total capacity is. So if I go over here to Edit, now I can see frame 0, my master frame. This is my 8-bit. Now it doesn't take it all the way up to 6480, but here are the dimensions of the canvas, right? So if I need it taller, I can just type 6480, right? And it'll adjust it. And if it needs to adjust the width, it will shorten it up if it has to. What if I only want to do 2160? Okay, now it won't automatically expand out to the max, okay? So if, say, you're going to do a big wide blend or a big wide LED wall, you could just basically set the canvas out far enough to make sure that it covers whatever you want to do it. So if I wanted to go to, say, 20,000 pixels, okay, obviously that's not the limit. Let's just go big here and say 50,000. Okay, so at 2160 at 8-bit, we get 36,096 horizontal pixels. And this is my canvas here, right? So keep in mind, if that's all you need, if all you need is the vertical height and you want to get the width, go ahead and make the adjustment here. And you can either come out of here and say, if you click on the Edit Canvas button, it'll leave it like that. Or you can come over here and say Reset and it'll pop it back to the original one, which should have been 4320. We'll leave it at that. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's pop this out. I'm gonna make this as wide as it can be. Okay, so now we've got our canvas set. So now I can add my pixel spaces. So we're gonna do, remember, a single pixel space. Now the difference with this one is, excuse me, I'm not saying I want a 2 by 1 array with you know, an 1200 pixel overlap. Sorry about the mistype here on the blending region. But I'm going to go in here and say add a pixel space, and I can do it by either hitting the plus sign here, or I can right click in here and say add a pixel space. And this is where it gets completely different than the previous version, because now I can just physically move that anywhere. And you can see right up here, this is the position. This is the X and Y position of the upper left pixel of the pixel space. So if I were to move it around, you can see it's kind of changing in real time. But if I want, let's say I just wanted to start it right up there in the upper left, 0, 0, and it basically snugs it right up there into the corner of the canvas. So that's the position. Now, right over here is the size. How big do I want that pixel space to be? There's a little button here in the middle that's normally in this state. It's an aspect ratio lock. So if you're trying to adjust the horizontal size of one dimensions of the, say, the width, say I put it out there at, what did I say it was, 6480, it's going to maintain aspect ratio. So it put the vertical height to 3645 right here. Okay. Well, I don't want it to do that. What I'm going to do is unlock the aspect ratio. And now I can go in and put the vertical size to 2160, and there's my pixel space that I want to create. Now, notice we're only using a very small portion of the canvas here. That's okay. We got plenty of room. So we definitely want to name this. So we're going to go over to the property panel right over here and give this pixel space a name. I'm going to call this main screen. And just for grins, I'll go ahead and type in the pixel space dimensions, which are 6480 by 2160. By all means, not required, but I like to do this so at a glance I can see what the dimensions of that screen are. Okay, so now I've got my pixel space in there. That's all I need to add for this one, so I can come over here and click next. Okay, so now you can see we have a little faint outline of where that pixel space is. To the left here now, these are all of our outputs. So I have a 16 output system. Which outputs do I want to use? Okay, now if you remember in the webinar, the first webinar, different outputs have different capabilities. So you want to think about what capabilities you want to use. So remember, certain ones can only be multi-viewers, like the 4th output on each board. Excuse me again. So in this case, I'm just going to use outputs 1 and 2 to populate this pixel space. So I can take right up here under the default resolution, go ahead and set that to say UHD at 59, which would be 3840 by 2160 at 59. And now anytime I drag something out, it's going to bring out that output at that resolution. And if I wanted to drag out 2 outputs, as I drag them out, you can see them highlighted over here on the left. You can see their position as I select them. So manually positioning these outputs is completely possible. This is what you would do if you were going to be manually positioning outputs for, say, an LED wall that had different areas of interest, right, or areas of responsibility. So in this case, you can still manually do that, and I'll show you a couple ways you can populate this blended screen here. So I'll start with output 1, okay? Go ahead and put it at pixel 0 horizontally and 0 vertically, okay, X and Y. And now that's mapped to the upper left side of that spot. Now, output 2, a little bit different, but we do need to know the actual start position. So if I know the horizontal start position is going to be 0, I'm sorry, the vertical start position is going to be 0. But what's the horizontal going to be, okay? So remember what we said, we're going to do a 1200 pixel overlap. So if I open up that calculator again and I do 3840 minus 1200, 2640 is the start position for output 2. So I could come right over here, put in 2640, and now they're overlapped appropriately. Now, doing this does not turn on the blending function, okay? You have to when you manually position your outputs, you have to enable blending in the property panel. So if I were to select 1 and then I hold down the control key, select 2, I've got 2 outputs selected now, and there's always that anchor layer. So depending on which one you choose first, it'll give you some options. Up here, you've got alignment tools that we'll touch on in a minute. But over here, you can see in the property panel, I've got 2 outputs selected. Maybe I had chosen the wrong refresh rate for the output. I could go over here to load standard, pick from the factory list right here, and then choose the refresh rate I want. I could, excuse me, go to a Visa, type in a custom resolution, and then it would adjust those. Now, keep in mind, we built the pixel space based on 3840 by 2160 times 2 less the overlap. So don't want to mess this up too much. If I were connected directly to an X80, there's a third option here that is currently grayed out, but it's the EDID function. That means that output would go sniff out the EDID from, say, the projector or the LED processor and say, this is what I want. Would you like me to go ahead and set the output to that resolution? Very handy. You've got a couple of different blanking options here, but the EDID function is very handy if you're connected to the Spyder. It's on and it's connected to a specific LED processor or something that may be a little finicky, and that way you can get exactly what you want out of it. I'll go ahead and hit cancel. But as far as blending, I can go to the blending tab. I'll collapse these other ones. And you can see if I have both of these selected, there's a left option and a right option to enable blending. Well, in this case, I don't want to select them both. I only want to do them one at a time. So I'll select output 1, and I'll go over here to which side do I want to enable. I'll choose the right side and click enable, okay? And then there it gives me a pixel width on how much I should be blending. Well, it defaults to 256. Our blend is 1200, okay? So we want to make sure that that blending region or range matches our overlap. So I would just change this to 1200. And now that curve is there. So this gamma curve that it's using would be applied. You can choose a Bezier or a velocity. They're just different light curves that you can use. I find gamma's pretty friendly to work with most projectors. Then I would go to output 2 and choose, notice the right side is disabled, go to the left side and enable that side, and I would also match the same values. Okay, so now that light is being curved off the right edge of output 1 and the left edge of output 2, and those should be converged and mapped properly. So that's how you would manually do that blend. Let me show you the easy way, right? There's no easy button in here, but there are some easy processes. So let's say I just hit next to get to this tab. I could set my default resolution right here, UHD, okay? And then I'm going to choose output 1, and I'm going to hold down the control key and then select output 2. So now I have 2 outputs selected. I'm going to drag them out onto the screen together. Boom. Okay, now and I'm dropping them anywhere in the canvas. I don't worry, I don't have to sit there and try to manipulate them up where they are. Boom, I just drop them on, they're both selected. While they're both selected, okay? Even if you accidentally click away, go ahead and select them again. While they're selected, there is an area up here called the reference object. This is a way to align those outputs to a very specific pixel space, okay? Now, right now, we only have 1 pixel space, so if I drop down this menu, we're only gonna see main screen, okay? So now it says, okay, you want to align these outputs to this pixel space, and I get some alignment tools up here. Justify left, justify right, top, bottom, whatever. But the great thing here is the blend button. Okay, so that's the easy button. That will allow it to calculate, okay, this is the total dimensions of that pixel space. This is the resolution of the outputs. Let's go ahead and map them appropriately. It basically just does them evenly across the entire area. Keep in mind, it doesn't do the vertical array, so you'd have to do the top row first, and then go back, reselect the outputs, do the bottom row, and then justify to the bottom. Okay. Again, some of the other videos that we've created, you can actually see examples of that. So now the nice thing about using the blending button is that when you use the blend button, it automatically turns on the blending options for those outputs appropriately, meaning right edge of left of output 1 and left side of output 2. You don't have to go into the output properties to turn them on or enable them or adjust the settings. They do it automatically. So that happens with the blend button. Okay, so that's the little easy button there. So now I can just go next, and this is where things start to look a little more familiar. You got all the items you want to keep or delete. You can come in here and add your router if you wanted to. I'm just going to carry everything over here and click next. And then because I don't have a connected Spyder, it doesn't even give you the option to do it directly to a Spyder. We put it in local mode now. And then it prompts me, Okay and close, meaning I'm done, I don't need this anymore, or continue editing. What if you forgot, what if you made the pixel space the wrong dimension, or you decided, or they determined that the blend needed to be larger or smaller? You could immediately go right here to continue editing, and it basically walks you through the same settings of the configuration you just applied. Just go next, here's my pixel space, here are my outputs. I could go back and make any adjustments, go to the very end, and then apply again, and I could go and make those changes. So that's kind of nice way to go back and so if you forgot to add preview, or if you wanted a larger or smaller blend or add a pixel space, you can do it right there. So if I say okay and close, basically here we are. There's our single pixel space. And from this point forward, 95% of the operation of the X80 is the same as the X20. Okay, all this, creating command keys, bringing in sources, making adjustments and everything, it's all identical. Okay, with some new features that are plugged in that we'll go over the coming webinars. Okay, so here's our single pixel space one, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do another quick backup here, just watching the time. I'll try to make this quick. We'll do X80 single pixel space. And again, still prompts you to create, save images if you want to. Now, so basically gonna do the same thing, house left and right, DSMs, but we're gonna put the DSMs below, okay? So this is where we're gonna wanna think about total pixels, right? So if I think about this and I pull up my little calculator, and I look at this configuration, I can add 1920, which would be the left, this one. Now keep in mind, X80 puts a 16 pixel gap between pixel spaces, so you have to accommodate for those. So I'll go plus 16 plus 6480 for my widescreen, plus 16 for another gap between the house left, house right, and main. Then 1920, and I get 10,352 horizontal pixels. Okay, I know that my vertical is going to be 2160. Now I have a gap in there, but you don't necessarily have to put the gap vertically. So that would be 2160, 3240. Okay, when we add the 1080 on top of that. So we'll keep those dimensions in mind when we go to create this next configuration. So we'll go File, New, we'll stop and think. Okay, stop and think. Start with new and empty config. We're going to do a single Spyder. We'll keep NTSC. We'll put this at 8-bit. Yeah, that'll be fine. We'll turn on preview. We'll go next. And we're going to just start adding our pixel spaces. So I'll just go right here and add my first one. I'll come over here and give it a name. And notice the default size is actually kind of nice because it's exactly the size I want it to be. This will be house left. It is already 1920 by 1080, so I don't need to change it. Little tip here, when you start going in here and you want to select a pixel space, I would recommend using it from the list here. You'll see when we get a couple in here, because there's a tendency sometimes if you click in here, you may gently nudge that pixel space out of its position. So just be cautious with that. So I'll add our next one, and I'll make sure that only that one is selected. And I'm going to call this main screen. And again, I'll name it 6480 by 2160. Whoops, 2160. Now we come over here. I'll go ahead and adjust the dimensions to be 6480 by 2160. And you'll notice the start position is 1936, so 1920 plus 16. All right, so that's the gap that it puts in there. Okay, we'll go ahead and add our next pixel space. This will be house right. Okay, again, the default dimensions are what I want. I'll go ahead and add another one here for our DSM. And notice, because there was not enough room on the horizontal side, it went and dropped it in wherever it could fit it. So I want it justified below and to the left of the main screen. So I could just manually move it, and you're going to start to see snap tools if you start moving it around here. And you'll see some little pixel gap readings there, which shows you how many pixels you are away. I would be cautious on relying on trying to get your mouse to get that pixel space in the exact spot you want. if anybody's come through my class, I say do the math, right? It's AV math. It's relatively easy. Usually everything's divisible by something, 768 or 256 or something. But do the math, okay? You can use these other ones to help kind of determine. So if I want this justified to the left of the main screen, I can just click on the main screen, look at its start position, and then go back to this one. I never named this. We'll call this DSM1. And then I can go ahead and just make sure that it's there. Now I just happen to have it right there. But let's say I want it directly underneath that main screen. So I'll just put this at 2160. Okay, so now it's just snugged right underneath it. Okay, we don't need the 16 pixel gap below, only to left and right. Okay. We'll add our last pixel space, which will be DSM2. And this is pretty cool because you can actually select multiple pixel spaces, and these alignment tools will help you achieve alignment, okay? I keep looking at this camera and not this one. So what I can do is say, pick my anchor pixel space, hold the control key down, select my other pixel space, and say justify to right align, right? Or left, or center. Okay, so these are just cool little tricks that you can do. Maybe I had this one out of position. I could go main screen, then DSM, and say left, and then I believe I can just butt those together like that. Okay, so use these alignment tools. These are ones, if you're familiar with Studio or even Advanced, they're the same type. Sorry, my goodness. We'll gray that out. This is the same type of alignment tools you see in the simulator for aligning layers and everything, okay? So once I've got all my pixel spaces created, I can simply go next, right? And now we start mapping our outputs. And this is where I really tell people, take advantage of this reference object tool, okay? Here's what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna do this relatively quickly because we're coming up on the end of the hour. So I know I wanna use output 1 for house left. We'll do 2 and 3 for the main screen. I'm going to reserve output 4 for a possible multi-viewer. So I'm not going to use output 4. I'll use 5 here, 6 for DSM1, 7 for DSM2. Okay. So I'm going to take output 1. Whoops, wrong resolution. Let's change that back to the 1080p. Put this one, whoopsie daisy. Here we go. 1. Then we'll do. And because I have my default set to 1080p, I'm just going to drag all those out first, get them aligned, and then change the default and pull out those. So we want 5 over here, and notice I'm just getting them somewhere close, right? Just get them out there close. So now I'm just going to select 1, go to the reference object, choose house left, center, center. Okay, output 5, reference object, house right, center, center. And it's basically because the resolution matches the pixel space, it's popping it right in there and it's mapped perfectly. Output 6, reference object, DSM1, center, center, and then output 7, reference object, DSM2, center, center. Very cool tool to quickly just snap all of those outputs into their respective area of responsibilities and move on to the next one. So now I can go over here, choose my resolution for the widescreen, and then go ahead and say, let's go 2 and 3. And again, dragging them out anywhere. Don't care where I drop them, okay? I know they're already selected. 2's already the anchor layer, so it's gonna be start with 2 and then move on to 3. Go to the reference object, main screen, blend, okay? Super easy, super easy. You could still go through the process of manually mapping those. Then I would just simply go next, choose the items I want to keep or save or delete, go next and apply. Okay, say okay. Or again, current editing, if I wanted to go back and change something, I forgot to add preview, go next, 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 make any changes I want and then reapply. Okay, say okay. And again, you got to just resurface those. And again, you have the same old program, but again, from this point forward, it's identical to the advanced software as far as operation and and all the processes that you would go from this point forward. Okay, so I'll just clear the backgrounds real quick, and then we'll see all of our pixel spaces below. Okay, I'll do a quick backup, and I'll open it up to questions because I know we're right towards the end of the hour here. Any last?
I think you touched on it a bit, Peter, is using the alignment in the for the outputs. And you're using the snapping and the referencing tools, but just highlight that. And is there, let's see, and then any snapping features for the outputs to the pixel spaces?
So two-part. One was the, was it the blend?
Yeah. So the other one is automatically aligning outputs to pixel spaces.
Automatic? There's nothing automatic in there. You have to physically tell it where, which output is associated with which pixel space. I'm just going to pop right back through this thing here and go to these. So once you've defined your pixel space, right? So first it's pixel spaces, right? We're not talking about outputs. Then we move on to output setup. And then from there, we select the output. We go to the reference object. So what pixel space do we want this output referenced when we start using these alignment tools? So once we pick one, then so if I were to choose a different pixel space here, say this main screen, and I start using these tools, justify left, right, well, that's the wrong pixel space, right? But if I go over here and choose house left and say left or whatever, it's gonna basically pop to there, okay? I think that kind of answers both. The blend was the kind of tricky one where you're gonna take output one, sorry. Why is it doing that? That's not.
Output two.
Oh, duh, sorry. Thanks, Joel. Output two, output three, and again, select them in the order that you want them arranged. Choose your reference object, and then blend, okay? That makes sense? I think I answered that. If not, hit me up directly and I can give you a more detailed answer offline. Anything else?
Yeah, so why do we have the 8 and 16 pixel gaps between pixel spaces?
Well, there are other reasons. Let's just say that they've determined that they are required. There are reasons where you start scaling layers to a certain point. There was a possibility of them either bleeding or being clipped too early. So what we do is we put this gap in here to kind of cover that. So rather than having one pixel end on one pixel, have a pixel space end on one pixel and have another one start on the very next one, we just incorporate that little gap to ensure that we don't get any carryover or bleed into the other areas, right? I can look for a more technical answer to that, but that's the Cliff Notes version of that. They want that gap in there. They just want it in there.
We have a few multi-view or an MST questions. I think we'll address those in future web.
Yes, yeah, we'll definitely cover. Those are great topics.